You heard Becky read 2 Timothy 1:7 is going to be what I kind of focus the sermon on today. To let you hear it again. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. We begin with the story of David and Goliath this day. David and Goliath, it's become a part of our culture. It's even referred to in people who aren't religious. It's referred to in whenever a smaller team comes up against a bigger team. Yesterday, when James Madison came up against WVU, there were people that they even said it, that this is kind of a David and Goliath kind of thing. The good team from the smaller schools and the good team from the bigger schools. In this case, unfortunately, Goliath won from their perspective. But the reality of it is that has infiltrated our entire culture. We understand when we talk about David and Goliath that it's one small, unexpected person going up against one large, strong, and you expect the victor. Goliath stands before the people of Israel, and he sees himself as pretty much undefeated, and no one can defeat him. And he yells out and he decries their God. He makes fun of their God. He makes fun of their country. He makes fun of their king. He says, which one of you are going to come up and do something about it? Which one of you are going to come out and fight me? Because if you are any kind of a soldier or any kind of an Israelite, you come right now and you take care of me. But none of you can do that. You can hear him doing it. He goes on and on. But the people, including the king, were cowards. They weren't going to do it. They didn't know what to do. The king was wringing his hands, and it wasn't until a little guy named David comes along, a young shepherd who come from the field. He hadn't even come to fight. He had come to take lunch to his brothers who were in the army. And when he got there, he heard this giant Goliath saying horrible things about their God, and horrible things about their king, and horrible things about their country. And he looked and he said, aren't any of you going to do anything about this? But the answer was no, for they were cowards. They lacked courage. And that's what we're going to talk about today is in the well-fed Christian. I believe one of the characteristics of the well-fed Christian is they are people who have courage. Courage. How many of you have seen the Wizard of Oz? Courage. What makes a king out of a slave?
Courage.
What makes the flag on masquerade?
Courage.
What makes the elephant charge his tusk in the misty mist or the dusky dust? What makes the muskrat guard his musk?
Courage.
What makes the sphinx the seven wonder?
Courage.
What makes the dawn come up like thunder?
Courage.
What makes the Hottentot so hot? What puts the ape in the apricot? What have they got that I ain't got?
Courage.
That's right. The cowardly lion. If I were king before us. Stuff that stays with you. Stuff that stays with you. What I want us to talk about today is courage. And I believe that the passage from 2 Timothy gives us an outline for courage. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and a spirit of love and a spirit of self-discipline. First, the spirit of power. David had the spirit of power when he came and he heard Goliath because he knew where his power came from. And he knew what it could take, what that power could do, and he knew what he could take because of it, and he knew what he couldn't. David believed in a God that was bigger than Goliath, bigger than any problem that he could face. David knew that there was something stronger than this profane and defiling voice Jimmy Valvano is a basketball coach. He's been dead now almost 20 years. It's hard to believe. I looked at the speech that he gave at the ESPYs, his last public speech again this morning. There are several things that come from that speech. One is don't give up. That's the tagline, don't ever give up. Another, it says, that it struck me, he says that every day should have time to laugh, time to think, and time that your emotions are moved to the place that you cry. And he says, and if you had a day where you could laugh, think, and cry, you had a good day. Also, one of my favorite lines is the speech. Here's this man who's dying of cancer, won't live more than a few months after this speech. And he's on TV, and they're telling him 30 seconds, 30 seconds. And he looks at it and he says, that keeps telling me 30 seconds. He says, but I've got tumors all over my body, and they think I'm going to worry about 30 seconds. He says, I'm not. I'm going to finish what I have to say. And this is what he said. Cancer can take away my physical abilities, but it cannot touch my mind, it cannot touch my heart, it cannot touch my soul. Those three things are going to carry on forever. He was courageous in the face of a terrible and terminal disease. Let me ask all of us this day, what is the source of your power? What is the source of your power in your life? Like David, coming up against Goliath and knowing that he had power. What is your source of power in your relationships? What is the source of power in your work, in your church? The source that I would encourage you to lean upon is the same source that has been leaned upon by the people of God from before the time of David up until now, and that is the power and presence of a loving God who has promised us to give us strength in every need. For God did not give you a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power, point one, and of love, and of self-discipline. The spirit of love. There's a quote, and it's attributed to Redmond. Ambrose Redmond said, courage is not the absence of fear, it is the conviction that something else is more important. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the conviction that something else is more important. David knew that the honor of God, the protection of Israel, the protection of the king was more important than his own safety. He loved his country, and he loved his brothers and sisters, and he loved his God, and he loved them enough to stand for them. Deep love is the root of deep courage. I got to thinking about this today. It's not the sermon I added at 9:45. Kathy told you that she doesn't like heights. She doesn't like elevators either. I remember whenever Kathy would be coming over when I was at the conference center, and she was coming over to talk to JF and Carrie, she would call us, because there's only two ways to get to the third floor of the conference center, and that's by the elevator or by one of the two stairwells, both of which were locked at the top of the stairs. So Kathy would call, would tell us that she was coming, and we would go out beside the door that was beside the bishop's office, and we'd take a hanger and hang it on the handle so that it fouled the door so it couldn't close. And Kathy was able to come to get up to the top of the stairs. But I had been in a time when it was very important for you to fly somewhere. I'm trying to remember when Evan graduated. There was something with it that had to do with Evan, and he was graduating and so on and so forth. Her love for her son was more important than her fear of being in an enclosed space. So she got on the plane. And she went to be there. My brothers and sisters, that's true about us almost every single time. Because if we're faced with something that needs courage, every single one of us that is a thinking, breathing human being is going to be scared. But what makes us courageous is that when we love somebody more than our fear, it would take without asking, if I were to ask you today, if you needed to give up your life in order to protect the life of your child, would you? Almost every single parent I know would say, yes, of course I would. Because that would be the most important thing. Now, that doesn't mean you wouldn't be afraid, but you do it. You do it because of how important they were. And I ask today, what do you love? Who do you love? What do you love enough that it would cause you to overcome fear, to defend them, to be courageous? Because courage is not fear, the lack of fear. It is knowing that there is something else more important. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. Self-discipline. David comes to King Saul and he says, King Saul, can I shut that guy up? And Saul says, well, you're nobody big. And he says, I can do it. And he said, well, here, you're going to need something. And he takes off his own armor and puts it on him. And that would be like taking off my armor and putting it on somebody that's this tall. Because Saul was much larger. David was just a boy. And they said he put it on, and David said, I can't do this. I can't do this. There's too much to this. I gotta do it the way I know how to do it. Because he knew what he could do. Because he had been a shepherd. And he said, King, I fought off lions. I fought off bears. I fought off anything that would come to get my flock. And sometimes they've gotten one of the sheep, and I've pursued after them. And I've saved the sheep and brought it back. I can do this. I know how to do it. I've trained how to do it. Now, we don't know what David's slingshot looked like, but this is a slingshot I bought when I was in Israel. It was impressive seeing the guy use it as he took it, began to spin it real fast, and then he let go of one of the strings, and the rock would shoot out. What impressed me so much was he was shooting up over a hill at Lazarus' tomb, and he whined and whined and whined, and all of a sudden he lets go of it, and there's that sound when something goes through the air at a very high rate of speed, and that rock goes away, and I thought, my goodness, can you imagine if that rock would have hit somebody? It would have killed them. It would have caused great injury. And you can imagine that David had taken time as a shepherd boy to learn how to use that sling. How he took it, would practice, would set up something and hit it with the rock and do it over and over again, because that's what made him ready to defend the sheep. That kind of discipline is what each one of us do at all kinds of different things in our life, in all levels of our life, to get us ready, not for the mundane of the everyday, but for the crisis. Soldiers are trained over and over and over and over again in particular things that they do and how they respond to it and how they act, so that when the time of crisis comes, their response will be automatic. Second nature, right, Bob? That's how it is. As a preacher, I'm taught things in doing pastoral care, so that when the time of crisis comes, it's automatic. And you can say that about anything, any profession, any discipline. I've been an athlete all my life. I remember people teaching me how to do certain athletic things. Dale and I go out and play golf, and he keeps telling me one hint that I'm still working on how to hit the ball and hit it better. And you do it over and over again, so when the time of crisis comes, it becomes second nature. that make us courageous in difficult times. And it makes me ask myself, what kind of training am I preparing for? How am I reading Scripture? How am I praying? How am I testing my heart? Because the reality of it is, all of us will have a time of crisis. There's not a single one of us that will get through life without crisis. And how we respond to the crisis, whether it be with courage or with cowardice, will depend on how we got ready for it. I did a sermon on David and Goliath a few years ago. And I got the kids to help me. Isaac Blue was David. He had this sling. And of course, Isaac is, at that time, about this tall. Now he's grown up considerably. And I had the kids here. And I was doing my best Goliath imitation. I was saying, "Who are you, Israel, that you can't come out and fight me? Who are you that you have no one to stand up against me? What kind of God do you have? Be afraid." And I said, "Be afraid." Helen, Clarice and Truman's granddaughter, jumped up from the floor and ran back to her parents. I remember that like it was yesterday. I felt terrible. The last thing I want to do is scare a small child. But I accomplished it that day. You know, the reality of it is, every single one of us, when we're in crisis, we're going to want to be like Helen. We're going to want to run back to where the safety is, run back to mom and dad. But unfortunately, we're not all going to have that opportunity and that possibility. What we need is that dependence upon the Lord, that depth in our faith, that power of love that allows us to look at the greatest challenges and to see them for what they are, already defeated by the power of God. Already defeated by the power of God. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. Thanks be to God. As the United